Today's scam resembles something straight out of the 2001 film Heartbreakers, which is about a mother-daughter duo who go around conning rich men out of their fortunes. In the movie, one of the women would pursue a wealthy man and get him to marry her. Then afterwards, the other one would seduce him, leading to a divorce and, of course, a huge settlement. They used disguises, accents, whatever it took. This story shares many similarities and is about a woman who targeted a wealthy tree farmer by using her 17-year-old daughter as bait. Ralph Raines Jr. was a lifelong bachelor. He had spent most of his life in Gaston, Oregon, working on his father's tree farm. The farm was filled with Douglas firs, which were turned into telephone poles, many worth up to $1,000 each, and they owned 1,200 acres of them, so it was a very profitable business. By 2004, Ralph was in his mid-50s and still living on the farm with his sick father. Ralph didn't have a wife, or a girlfriend, or any close friends, but what he did have was an interest in the paranormal. And that's what led him to this woman, 32-year-old Rachel Lee, who in 2003 had opened a psychic shop in Bend, Oregon, nearly 3.5 hours away from Ralph's tree farm. But during a conference for tree farm owners, Ralph visited the shop and the two immediately developed a strong relationship. Ralph talked about his life on the tree farm, his father's wealth, and how he had lost his mother 3 years ago. Hoping to connect with Ralph, Rachel shared that she too had recently lost her mother, which was a flat-out lie because her mother was actually alive and well in California. She then opened up to him about caring for her late husband as he died of cancer, and that she was an expert bookkeeper and oversaw the finances for his auto body shop as his health declined, which were just more lies. That aside, she convinced Ralph that her psychic abilities could help him find what he most wanted in life: companionship and a family. Over the next 2 years, Ralph and Rachel kept in touch as close friends, or so he thought, but in reality, Rachel was just grooming her target. She secretly wanted his money and would stop at nothing to get it. Ralph began buying Rachel gifts on a regular basis, including a Hummer. He even hired her boyfriend Blancy as a handyman to perform odd jobs around his house. Rachel then persuaded Ralph to buy a $915,000 mansion in an upscale Portland neighborhood, telling him it would be a good investment. She moved into that house with Blancy, and there was constantly a revolving door of family members and friends who would also live there with them. Meanwhile, Ralph and his aging father continued living in their dilapidated homes on the tree farm, which they seemed happy doing because they were simple blue-collar people. In late 2006, something significant happened. Ralph's father suffered a stroke, which left Ralph in charge of all finances for the tree farm and looking after his ailing father. Rachel quickly came to the rescue and offered to not only take control of the tree farm's finances, but also become his father's full-time caregiver. After all, she did care for her own dying husband and oversaw the finances for his auto business, which, remember, wasn't true. But of course, Ralph didn't know that and thought it was a great idea and quickly hired her to be his dad's caregiver, at a staggering rate of $9,000 per month, which was more than twice what the average caregiver was making at that time. Ralph later admitted in court that he wanted to pay her the going rate but didn't know what that was, so he just took Rachel's word for it that $9,000 was fair. That just went to show just how trusting and naive Ralph really was. And Rachel hardly gave a shit about Ralph's dying father. At one time, Rachel moved him into that Portland mansion, but since she and her other family members were occupying all the bedrooms, made him sleep in the hallway. So Rachel was just this terrible person. So terrible that she decided that now was the time to exploit Ralph's loneliness in order to really pry his fortune from him, and recruited her 17-year-old daughter to become Ralph's new lover. It was 2007 when Ralph Raines Jr. flew back to Portland from a timber convention. After his plane landed, he phoned Rachel for a ride home, and she instructed him to wait outside the airport in the smoking area. And as he's sitting on this bench waiting, there's this woman standing next to him. The woman had bright blonde hair, wore a hat, sunglasses, and heavy makeup. She suddenly turned to Ralph and with a very striking British accent asked him if his name was Ralph. Ralph was amazed by her psychic powers and very excitedly replied yes. The two struck up a conversation, and the woman tells Ralph that she's not really a psychic by trade, but every once in a while she can sense things in people. She introduces herself as Mary Marks and tells Ralph that she's a professional bookkeeper. Go figure. Ralph and this stranger, Mary Marks, really hit it off and made plans to have coffee later that week. Well, unbeknown to Ralph, this woman's name wasn't actually Mary Marks, it was Porsha Lee, Rachel's 17-year-old daughter. And she wasn't a woman, she was essentially a child. But for the next 6 years, Porsha would stay in this character as Mary Marks, wearing a wig, thick makeup to make herself appear older, and doing that British accent, all the while pretending that she had no connection with Rachel. She was even brought on to assist Rachel with Ralph's finances. Very convincingly, Porsha wormed her way into Ralph's life from her late teens all the way through her early 20s and made him fall in love with her. Once she had him in the palm of her hand, she started up with all the drama about how she needed a green card and if only you would marry me so I wouldn't be deported and I could stay here with you. Because remember, Ralph believed Mary was from Britain and living here on a visa, so he agreed to marry her so she could become a US citizen. Rachel, who by this point was basically Ralph's estate manager and bookkeeper, concocted this phony marriage contract which they both signed, and Ralph believed that he and Mary Marks were legally married and starting this happy new life together. Now, while Ralph and Mary, aka Porsha, did spend a lot of time together, they didn't live together full time because she claimed she had this job in California which kept her there most of the time. This allowed Porsha to have a separate life away from Ralph and not have to be in the character Mary Marks 24/7. But in her separate life, Porsha became pregnant. This posed a problem because she wasn't having sex with Ralph, therefore she needed a way to justify her being pregnant. To fix that problem, Porsha went to Ralph early on in the pregnancy before she was really showing and convinced him that they should have a baby through artificial insemination. Ralph had always wanted to start a family, so it wasn't hard to get him on board. So he gladly took the container Mary gave him, deposited a sperm sample into it, stored it in the refrigerator, then later gave it to Mary with the understanding that she was taking it to a fertility doctor for an IVF procedure in California. 9 months later, Mary came back with a baby boy. Their baby boy. This made Ralph the happiest he had ever been. He was finally a dad. Of course, it wasn't really their child. In fact, this particular baby wasn't even Porsha's biological child. No, the baby she had just given birth to was off with his paternal father, safely away from this whole scam, while the baby she brought back to Ralph actually belonged to her sister and was lent out to Porsha in exchange for some money. The two sisters just so happened to give birth within weeks of each other, so it conveniently worked out. Over the next few years, Ralph, Mary, and their son Giorgio would spend holidays together, go on trips, and Ralph was really just loving life with his new family.
Happy birthday! Give it one more time, Ralph.
And it was during this time that Rachel really began draining Ralph's fortune, which was easy to do because Rachel now held power of attorney for Ralph and the Rains Tree Farm and was able to control its finances any way she liked. She sold off family stocks and used corporate credit cards to buy clothes, cars, and 5-star vacations.
It's our last night here. We'll be in Florence tomorrow. Ciao. We're here in Paris on our anniversary at the Eiffel Tower.
She even bought her boyfriend Blancy a $64,000 Rolex. And after Ralph's father died in 2011, the spending became even more absurd. Rachel sold off a large portion of the family's tree farm for over $12 million and told Ralph that she had to because he owed a huge inheritance tax. Rachel and Blancy used that money to buy a $200,000 Ferrari and a $300,000 Bentley. They purchased rental properties and opened up more psychic shops in Oregon and California. Meanwhile, to keep the scam going, Ralph's wife, Mary Marks, went back to him for another sperm sample so they could have a second child. This time, she faked the pregnancy, going as far as to wear a fake pregnancy belly under her shirt in order to trick Ralph. Ralph was so excited for this new addition to the family and even had a custom license plate made up with their names, the name of their son Giorgio, and their soon-to-be-born daughter, Gloria. However, Mary would later call Ralph with sad news that she had lost the baby. For 10 years, Ralph Rains Jr., a hardworking, kind, and generous tree farmer, had put his trust into people he thought loved him, and in return was lied to and stripped of almost his entire family fortune. He had millions of dollars embezzled from him, was tricked into a fake marriage by a woman posing as a British financial expert, then lied to about having a son that wasn't really his. But like all scams, it was time for this one to fall apart. And that all began when a Portland detective kept spotting a Ferrari parked outside a house in Canby, Oregon, while commuting to work. The house was actually one of the newer properties Rachel had purchased with Ralph's money, and also served as a psychic shop. Canby was a small community, used mostly for farming, so a Ferrari really stuck out there and made the detective rather suspicious. The detective also noticed that the smart car parked right next to the Ferrari had a license plate that said Ralph, and decided to look deeper into who Ralph might be. She discovered that the property was owned by a tree farmer named Ralph Rains, and that not only did Ralph Rains own this particular house/psychic shop, but he owned several of them around Oregon and California, which raised the question, why was a tree farmer investing in psychic shops? The detective began working closely with Canby police and the IRS to investigate what exactly was going on, and soon learned all about Rachel, Porsha, and Blancy. They obtained a search warrant on that psychic shop in Canby, and inside found expensive watches, jewelry, and rare coins, all purchased with Ralph's money. They also found the disguise Porsha had been using to portray Mary Marks for the last 7 years. Police then went to Rachel's other psychic shop in Bend, Oregon, where Ralph had his first psychic reading 10 years ago, and when they arrived, they found Rachel Lee and her daughter Porsha Lee ready to flee town. Their bags were packed, they had disposable cell phones, and police found $36,000 in cash stuffed inside Porsha's underwear. In 2014, Rachel Lee, Porsha Lee, and Blancy Lee were all arrested and charged with a range of crimes, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Yet, even after their arrests, Ralph still didn't see himself as a victim, and even wrote a handwritten letter to prosecutors saying as much, trying to get Rachel and the others off the hook. But prosecutors knew Ralph didn't see things clearly and had been brainwashed for years into trusting these people. During their trials, Ralph even continued wearing his wedding ring from his fraudulent marriage with Mary Marks, not completely accepting what had happened to him. And it was the first time he had ever seen Mary Marks, aka Porsha Lee, out of her disguise. As you may have noticed, she had on that blonde wig and hat in every single photograph. In the end, Rachel Lee, the mastermind behind the entire operation, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Her daughter Porsha, who was 25 years old during the trial, was sentenced to 2.5 years, and Blancy Lee was sentenced to just 2 years. The three were also ordered to pay Ralph a combined $30 million in restitution, and he did receive several millions of dollars back in unspent stolen cash and recovered luxury goods. Which is great because following the scam, Ralph was left with just $200,000 out of the $15 million fortune he had inherited. After the trial, Ralph continued living on 300 acres of land which he still owned. He wished nothing but the best for Rachel, Porsha, and Blancy, despite what they did to him. That's it for today's scam. If you enjoy scam stories like these, karate chop that subscribe button because I post once a week. So until next time, keep your eyes open for scams.